On Fox News, apparently last night, I think, was this on Foxhounds or was it on, just take a quick look here. New Republic, Newshounds, excuse me. Maybe it wasn't on Newshounds. I forget the website. But in any case, there was a guy who was on, some climate change denier, who was on Fox News in the very recent past, who was saying, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it used to be 280 parts per million. It's now 5 parts per million. That's good because carbon dioxide is food for plants. It's carbon and plants need carbon. So that's a good thing that all this fossil fuel has been burned and all the carbon that has been released from the fossil fuel has been thrown into the atmosphere. So there's this amazing article by Helena Bottomiller-Evich over at Politico, and it's titled The Great Nutrient Collapse. This is mind-boggling. It's a story about a mathematician, a scientist. His name is Erikla Loladze, and he's working on his PhD, or he was back in 1998. He's working on his PhD at Arizona State University. And he was looking at zooplankton. Now, zooplankton is the little tiny animals that are almost invisible that like whales eat, right? And, it's the bottom of the food chain in the ocean. You got a plant bottom of the food chain and an animal bottom of the food chain. The plant bottom of the food chain is algae. The animal bottom of the food chain is zooplankton. And pretty much everything above that eats those, or eats something that eats those. Everything in the ocean. So the scientists were looking at the zooplankton and trying to figure out, okay, how can we affect the life cycle of these little tiny animals? And they discovered that if they shined light on the algae, now keep in mind, algae are plants, and plants grow as a result of two things. Carbon, which they make into carbohydrates. They take carbon, mix it with water. Carbohydrate, like sugar. Sugar is what? C6H12O6, as I recall? Yeah, so, I think that's glucose. It's a simple sugar. So there's 6 carbon atoms, 12 hydrogen atoms, 6 oxygen atoms, right? So you take, and where do you get the carbon and the oxygen and the hydrogen? Well, you take carbon dioxide, which is an atom of carbon and 2 atoms of oxygen. And you take water, which is an atom of oxygen and an atom of hydrogen, or 2 atoms of hydrogen, actually, H2O, and you combine them. And what you end up with is a substance, you end up with sugar, right? Or carbohydrates, and which are used to make stems of plants and the structure of plants and everything else. And they're called carbohydrates because they have carbon and hydrogen in them, right? And oxygen. But in order to make carbohydrates, plants need sunlight. Sunlight is the energy that fuels the process. So they discovered that if they shined light on algae, the algae grew faster, which caused the zooplankton to grow faster. Makes sense, right? Except that at a certain point, the zooplankton started dying off. They were struggling to survive, was the phrase that they used in the article, which is a paradox. I mean, more food is supposed to lead to more growth, right? Why is it that more algae is causing the zooplankton to die off? So he dug into this thing and he said, okay, what the heck could this be? What's going on? And they've been studying this since 1998, and they finally figured it out. He's calling it the junk food effect. Reading from the article. This is from The Great Nutrient Collapse by Helena Bottomiller-Evich. The junk food effect he had learned about in the Arizona lab also appeared to be occurring in fields and forests around the world. Actually, I need to explain the junk food effect. For 17 years they've been researching this. The junk food effect is that when you add sunlight to the algae, you increase its rate of growth, but you don't increase its rate of nutrients. So you get more carbohydrate, less minerals, less vitamins, less enzymes, all the things that the zooplankton needed to live. There was less of that, and there was more carbohydrates. In other words, they basically took the zooplankton from kind of a natural foods diet to a Twinkie diet. I mean, that's pretty much what happened. And now they're saying this is happening to you and me as a result of 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. Plants are actually growing faster, as predicted, as said by the climate change denier on Fox News. Oh, isn't it wonderful? Plants will grow faster if you have more carbon in the atmosphere, more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this is a quote from his study. Every leaf and every grass blade on Earth makes more and more sugars as CO2 levels keep increasing. We are witnessing the greatest injection of carbohydrates into the biosphere in human history, an injection that it dilutes other nutrients in our food supply. He said, and then they dug into it and they said, is it possible that our food is becoming less nutritious and more like Twinkies, more full of sugars, carbohydrates, because of extra carbon in the air, extra carbon dioxide? Measurements of fruits and vegetables show that their minerals, vitamin, and protein content has measurably dropped in the last 50 to 70 years. Before the Industrial Revolution, they point out we had 280 parts per million. Now we're over 400 parts per million. Representative Lamar Smith, a Republican who chairs the House Committee on Science, said, and I quote, "A higher concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere would aid photosynthesis, which in turn contributes to increased plant growth," the Texas Republican wrote. "This correlates to a greater volume of food production and better food quality." Well, in fact, quoting from the article, in fact, they may be inversely linked. In other words, yes, you get a greater volume of food production, you get a worse food quality. Lamar Smith is wrong. Lamar Smith, of course, a shill for the fossil fuel billionaires and chairing the House Committee on Science, a guy who doesn't believe in climate science. So here's from the article again. Rising CO2 revs up photosynthesis, the process that helps plants transform sunlight into food. This makes plants grow, but it also leads them to pack in more carbohydrates like glucose at the expense of other nutrients that we depend on. That would be you and me. That would be all living things. This is from our food to our dog food. The nutrients that we depend on are going down. So our food, it also leads to packing more and at the expense of other nutrients that we depend on, like protein, iron, and zinc.